showing up, and we'll be getting on the road shortly.
Joe, you're on mute.
Okay. Oops, sorry about that. I was on mute. So again, I'll welcome everybody to the webinar. This is the second in our series. This topic here is State of Industrial Network Security. Just so everybody knows, this session will be recorded so that if you've missed anything or you want to go back and look at it again, or you want to share it with other people, if anyone comes late and they want to view the whole thing, they can go to our website. We will be providing a link via email to all the participants and everyone who signed up. The other thing is we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, type them into there's a section there in the bottom there for Q&A. When we get to that section, we will go through the questions that people have asked. So feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll answer them near the end. All right. So basically, the subject is industrial network security. It's something that's very important these days, as recent events have shown. We did discuss this somewhat in our last webinar, but it's such a big topic, it really needed a webinar of its own. So we've assembled a list of panelists who have some expertise in this area. Trevor Lang from HMS, Dominic Genzano of STI Group, and William Nieves of Turtle and Hughes, who handles our Rockwell Allen Bradley technology. So if I want to see, put up the slide about the next slide, Evelyn. Thank you. Okay, so
okay.
well,
Hi. Thanks, Joe.
Not...
My name is Dominic Genzano. I'm the CEO of STI Group. We're a cybersecurity consulting, engineering, and managed services firm. We've been around for 20 years now. We have several service divisions that work in an integrated fashion to service our customers. Cybersecurity, what we refer to as secure IT engineering, which of course is extremely important to the industrial control systems environment because there's not a lot of security specific technologies in the ICS environments, right? It's all about implementing and configuring these systems in a secure way. And we'll certainly talk more about that as this webinar goes on. And we also have project management and human capital solutions divisions to kind of round out our offerings, right? So we like to use the term integrated, agnostic, and best in class, where we're not just a small IT, an IT firm that does some cybersecurity work or some cybersecurity personnel that also provide some IT engineering. We actually have top-end professionals in each of those disciplines working in an integrated fashion. Go ahead. Right, so just a brief word on our clients. We've kind of crossed over, and it's pretty interesting and relevant to what we're talking about today, right? We grew up, so to speak, in the commercial space, right? Building and designing and implementing cybersecurity programs for commercial businesses, right? Everything from financial to pharmaceuticals to healthcare, et cetera, and everything that goes along with that, right? So we then obtained a GSA contract and we started doing work for government agencies and contractors. We have some significant clients in the aerospace and the weapons manufacturing space. Certainly you start to see some of the industrial control systems come into play there. And over the last 10 years or so, we've built a pretty significant client base in the critical infrastructure space, right? Particularly mass transit and utilities. Right. So, what we've been able to kind of bring to the table here is, translating the elements of cybersecurity programs that are typical in the enterprise commercial space to the industrial control system space, where there's different requirements and priorities and different sets of challenges, but the overall strategy is very similar there. So. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll come back to this. We'll only go to Trevor, and we'll come back to this one.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to go ahead and share some information about my company. I guess Evelyn, can you stop sharing? Yeah, and then I'll share mine. Thank you. Okay, so HMS Industrial Networks is a firm that has been involved with industrial networking across a wide range of applications for more than 30 years. We are involved with everything from industrial communication technology at the end device level, like sensors and instrumentation and drives and controllers, up to machine communications with things like protocol translators and other types of communication bridges. We get into wireless communication technology. And then we also get involved with bridging between OT networks or networks that are producing things or controlling things with IT systems, so that if you want to do data collection, you can move data from plant floors or process control systems up into systems that want to do analysis or data collection. And that can both be in a local level, but we also support IoT connectivity to cloud-based systems. Sorry, I got a slide change hiccup here. Okay, so one of the brands that fits into
Trevor, just so you know, we don't see your screen if you're trying to share it.
That's a problem. I thought I had it shared. I apologize. So I guess I'll just start on this screen here. So one of the brands in our portfolio that really provides us with the knowledge base for this discussion today is our E1 brand. And one of the things that we offer in the E1 solution is the ability to connect to equipment, either remote locations or within a factory floor setting, for purposes of things like service monitoring and analysis. So we have a whole range of products that fit into this this architecture, and one thing that we do is provide a secure access to the equipment. In addition to that, we also provide the ability to do on-premises data monitoring. So that means that any data that exists in the system can be monitored. It can be even accessed remotely, so you can see it through a web browser, or if you're traveling, you can pull things up on your phone. But all the data lives within your own network. But then there's also cases where your data needs to travel and it needs to get to some destination, like a cloud-based application. So we support data telemetry from processes and factory floor applications to push that data into cloud-based applications, and we support a wide range of those. So just how we accomplish this is through a network of servers that are scattered throughout the world. This little geographic outline here is of a bunch of blue dots that represent individual devices or machines that are deployed throughout the world using our infrastructure. And you can see we have a pretty large user base with over 300,000 devices out there running, and millions of secure connections from between devices or from individual users. And our security is one of our key parts of our solution, is that we follow several security standards like ISO 27001 and IEC 62443. And we also partner with companies like Enviso for helping get validation on our security systems. So that's just a quick rundown on things we do, and hopefully we can provide some value in the discussion upcoming here.
So William?
Well, thank you. This is a great opportunity to have a great discussion. I want to say it's always a privilege to share this space with Trevor. Dominic, looking forward to listen to you, because there is a lot of things that we can learn from your comments today. Turtle & Hughes is a 100-year-old company. We represent many companies. One of them is HMS, actually, but I think that the most important company that we represent is Rockwell Automation. So today, I want to bring what is the scope of a company like this one about cybersecurity in the OT space. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion, and I have a few examples about how the bad guys are doing bad things. So we're going to be talking about that. Looking forward to listening what we have here. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, William. All right. So if you could put, yeah, thank you. All right. So why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Well, we talked about recent events, most notably the pipeline that was shut down a few months ago, causing major disruptions around the world. And as you can see here, so the FBI, according to the FBI, the cost of cybercrime in the U.S. is $3.5 billion in 2019, and that number has been escalating. As we talked about in our last webinar, we know of multiple clients who were hit with denial of service attacks and ransomware attacks, and their campus networks, their information networks were not properly secured. Fortunately, thanks to some technology from both Rockwell and from HMS, we were able to protect their automation assets. But there's something that's a growing issue, because there's usually a struggle between IT and OT, and we've partnered now with STI Group as we're trying to roll these solutions out to our clients and kind of make them aware of what the threats are and how to mitigate them. As you can see in New Zealand, they estimate a ransomware at $9 billion. And then anyone who doesn't know what a ransomware is, basically they get a worm onto your network, they hijack your computers, and then they insist that you pay them large sums of money, typically in the range of $40,000, to get your data back, so you can start using your computers. The clients that we know that has happened to, this caused major disruptions in the matter of weeks, several weeks, to in a couple of cases a few months before they were able to get their network back online. So one of the things we want to talk to about this is what are the threats? What are the existing and growing threats? And we want to also talk about what are ways to mitigate this? Because there are ways all along the entire operation, from your plant IT network to your OT network and the interface in between the two. So I want to start off here. First question I'm going to have for our panelists. I'm going to start with Dominic, but we're going to put the question out to everybody else afterward. Is based on your experiences, what are the most prevalent existing and probably more important emerging threats that you're encountering? What's happening out there? What are the bad guys doing?
Thanks, Joe. Well, one of the things that, and kind of the perspective that I can kind of bring to this, right, is a lot of the threats that are now entering, the OT space, especially the critical infrastructure sector, are threats that have existed in the commercial sector for quite some time. And ransomware, as you mentioned, is a good example of that, right? But the bad actors out there are now realizing that basically the same exploits that they might have executed on a commercial network, or the same types of malware that they might have implemented there, are, number one, more impactful in the industrial systems world, because it's affecting actual operations, right? It's not just systems and information being available or at risk, but actual business operations and technology and machinery operations, and also potentially a threat to human life. And also the fact that the industrial control system networks are typically not as hardened against cybersecurity threats as commercial networks have come to be over the years, right? You're dealing with a lot of legacy technologies, some proprietary protocols, systems that can't be necessarily hardened to the extent that people are familiar with traditional IT systems, and also personnel who aren't as up to speed with regard to cybersecurity awareness and the threats that are out there, right? So if you couple that with the fact, all those elements with the fact that now you're dealing, and we've seen this a lot in the mass transit industry especially, right? We're communicating with the Department of Homeland Security quite frequently on this, right? You're dealing with threat actors, based, from international state like China and Russia, et cetera, that are actually looking to do damage to these systems that may affect human life, right?
Yeah, and just to interrupt you real quick, Dom, and I think that's one of the more concerning things. That in the past, it was viruses, maybe wiping out your hard drive, or even ransomware is a problem. But now when you're getting to the point of people actually hijacking systems and causing them to do damage, that's particularly when you said you're in the transit space or utility space, where you can cause some serious damage to, and both the human life and loss of property.
Right, everything from positive train control in the mass transit world to large power outages or water contamination, right? There's some serious elements that can be exploited there, and our experience has been getting further and further into the critical infrastructure world over the last 10 years, that the cybersecurity threat landscape is just starting to make its way into that space, and people are generally not ready, right? They're implementing technologies, right, that are IP enabled, or other network protocols that may be applicable that are more proprietary, right? And these things are being implemented because obviously they represent a convenience in terms of operation and management and data acquisition and things along those lines. But along with those conveniences, vulnerabilities are introduced, right? And that's really where we have to focus our efforts.
Yeah, I'd like to put the same question out now. I'm going to go to first to William. What are you seeing on your end as far as existing threats and emerging threats that are causing trouble?
Yes, actually, I want to reinforce. I'm going to answer the question, but I want to complement something that Dominic was saying that is extremely important. And I want to use actually the words of the Homeland Security Secretary that last week, Mr. Alejandro Mayorkas said about this attempt to hack the facility in Florida, that's purely to do harm. So what we're seeing is a transition from ransomware to killware. And that's something that we have to be aware of. The capacity to do damage in our infrastructure, it means that. So we have to be up to the task of how we're going to protect that. And another thing that Dominic was mentioning that is very interesting is how these attacks that used to be in the IT universe are reaching out OT networks. And there is a very interesting timeline for Dragos that shows that in early 2020, we have an attack from something called ACANS or Snake, that it was a pure type of attack that we saw in the IT universe, now reaching out OT networks. Why OT networks? Well, Dominic told us it's a legacy product. Most of the protocols that we use in OT are not designed for hacking or for anything related with security. Our
sorry to interrupt you, William. We're not getting your slides up on the screen. Julie, can you release control of the screen? Let William take over.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, basically, I'm just projecting over the screen. But one of the key elements about OT today is how the protocols are evolving to be secure. And this is one of the most interesting developments that we have in a long term when you think about security industrial protocols. Over Ethernet IP, that is one of the most common industrial protocols out there. Everybody is familiar with Ethernet IP. Now, Ethernet IP has been the protocol to go for all kinds of industries. Recently, the ODBA, that is the foundation behind Ethernet IP, introduced cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is a different way to talk about cybersecurity in OT universe. So we know about the peripheral type of protection through firewalls, but what about PLC to PLC? What about computer Studio 5000 to PLC? You need something else there. And how you implement security in all networks? Do I need to change the whole network? Do I need to update every single device to have security? No, the answer is no. So SIP security is a very interesting way to deal with security in OT. Now, what exactly that means? Well, today you are using SIP security for your bank transaction. If you're familiar with HTTPS, it's exactly the same principle that Rockwell and ODBA are implementing over your PLCs. So they use something called TLS or DTLS, and every single connection that you have between asset, it will have certification, encryptions, and many other things related with this type of technology. So this is the future that is happening today. Security, not only between actors that want to get into the network, but how to secure link-to-link communications. So let's just leave it that for now.
Yeah, and just to expand on what William is saying, right? So when we talk about the PLC and the PAC technology, right, and the devices on the networks and their intercommunication with each other and the legacy nature of these networks, right? One of the more prevalent concepts that we tried to implement in the commercial world that William has talked about is now coming into the IOC world, right, is the idea of authenticated connections, right? In the past, these PLC networks were relatively automated. There was physical security around around the areas where one could connect to this network, right? And now, due to the expansion, right, and things like wayside components and large nationwide networks for OT devices, et cetera, right? Now the physical security is not quite there, right? And so how do we verify, number one, if something is connected to that industrial control system network that doesn't belong there, right? How is it detected? And we can talk about that more as we talk about mitigation strategies. But the second piece is, how do you authenticate communications between industrial control system devices so that an unauthorized device can't initiate a connection and exploit the potential vulnerabilities?
Right. And I think what I'd like to do then is actually bring Trevor in on this part. since that's his,
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So to carry on with that, I think one of the things that Dominic talked about is, there's this legacy installed base. It's gigantic, but people want to start getting access to this legacy equipment. And the old days, the easiest way was just leave it disconnected, as some people call an air gap. But that's just not practical for today's business environment. We need to get information to and from those machines from MES systems, or vendors need to get access to provide service or do an analysis to monitor performance. So all this is retroactively being applied to older equipment that doesn't have some of these latest security principles in place, just like simple encryption. So one of the mechanisms to kind of deal with that is put in equipment that provides routing and separation of networks or network segregation. These could be NAT or network address translation types devices. They can be routers, and then you also have to put in user access control policies in place with those types of devices, so that if there is a user in the network that shouldn't have access to something, they got a barrier to get past. And I think these are some of the things that people need to think about as they start bringing legacy equipment into kind of an IT world. What can you put in place to protect not only the equipment, but make sure that that the equipment is not causing problems on the IT side as well.
Right, and then there's the human factor, right? Trevor just referred to the idea of an air gap, right? And of course, that's always been the traditional way of keeping industrial control system networks isolated from the threats that are pretty prevalent and long-standing in the commercial environments, right, on the business side of the house. Now, the issue with that, of course, right, and everybody's heard about the supply chain cybersecurity concerns, right, is that somebody needs to service this equipment often, right? Somebody needs to connect something to do some work on this equipment, right? So one of the things that we've seen, for example, is, okay, these are now network devices, even though they're air gapped, but there's a technician who needs to run a particular application on a laptop that they need to connect to this network or this system to perform configuration management or updates, et cetera. Well, one of the things that we've seen out there now is that, the hackers are pretty smart about these things, and they know that these laptops that are managed by this maintenance firm are things that will connect to these devices. Well, are these laptops secured, right? Is the maintenance company, and we actually saw this in one case, that the maintenance company was leaving these laptops in a truck in an unsecured garage for the next time they went out to perform their responsibilities in terms of maintaining these systems in the field, right? So what if somebody went in and put malware or ransomware or killware on a maintenance laptop, and then when the technician went out to a wayside component in the field and connected to update the software, the ransomware got propagated that way, right? So hackers out there are pretty clever. They've been at this for a long time. So we need to understand not just how to lock down the systems, et cetera, but we need to understand the methods that the threat actors out there are using to exploit these systems, and make sure that there's not just technology measures, but personnel and procedural measures that are in place to prevent these sorts of things.
Well, and I think, and from hearing the discussion, I'd like to kind of do a quick summary for people listening. The approach, it really requires for any system, and both on the IT side and the OT side, a comprehensive evaluation of the system and what potential threats there are, what connections need to exist, which ones don't need to exist. And then really, things kind of break down into a few different levels. You have, software security, you have hardware security, and then you have administrative controls. And I think that's common, most things fall into one of those three categories. And so each of these has to be evaluated to, one, reduce the approaches to threats, and then to put barriers to those, to keep those threats from propagating.
one of the things that some of the customer ask is how they do it, how these bad guys can do bad things. So there is a list of hacking tools, the top hacking tools of 2021 out there. But something quite interesting that I found is sometimes you don't have to be that specialized to do an attack. I think that some of the people that is in the webinar are familiar with Shodan or Google Docs and how you can use this to scan networks. And I have a very interesting anecdote to share. In DEF CON 26, that is the maximum conference or the biggest conference of hackers in the world, legal, they present an attack over Modbus TCP networks. They perform an injection attack where they send a bad Modbus package to a micrologics unit and remotely kill the PLC. Not even a sophisticated attack itself, only a bad command that keeps repeating, making the PLC getting offline. Modbus TCP today is one of the friendly protocols that IT people like to use. Why? It's a single port 502 that you need to block or not, and everything else is going to be working. Well, today the bad guys know this very well. And if in DEF CON 26, they show us how to perform an attack over a device like this one, legacy device, using Modbus TCP, can you imagine what other things are possible to do out there? But that was a very interesting anecdote to share for this webinar.
Thanks. I'm sorry, Joe. Yeah, thanks, William. One additional comment on that, right? When we talk about how the threat actors are exploiting things, right, is you have to remember that, sure, there's common tools out there that hackers might use to identify protocols and listening services, vulnerabilities, that sort of thing, right? And there are security tools that detect anomalies in communications that might occur among systems, right? But of course, the hackers know this too, right? The threat actors are aware of the tools that are typically used. And most commonly, the threat actors will avoid detection by conducting the compromise or the breach in utilizing openings in the system that are there due to misconfiguration in a way that won't be detected as an anomaly because they're using the same types of system access and system access paths that are authorized for users and other devices, right? So really the configuration hardening of the systems is critical here, right? And when you can't harden the configurations because you're dealing with legacy technology with limited configuration options, right? How do we not just have air gaps, but have what we call jump boxes for access to these systems that we can implement some of the controls like logging and monitoring and authorization on an intermediary device, right? And Ewan was mentioned as a possible device that might facilitate that sort of thing, but there are others, and there's other ways that this can be done on local networks as well.
Yeah, just a quick jump in here. For anyone who arrives later, just a reminder, we are recording this session. So if you missed the beginning and you want to go back and watch it, it'll be up on our YouTube page. You'll be getting an email that will give you a link to go view that if you want to do that. Also, we are taking questions later on in the Q&A session. So in your Zoom client, just click on Q&A and you can ask questions. And when we get to the Q&A session, we'll start running through any of the questions that are there. So you might want to start building your questions now while you think of them, and then we'll address them at the appropriate time. Actually, while we have this one up here, William, this is your slide. If you want to kind of talk a little bit about, we've mentioned OT, and I'm not sure that everybody understands what OT is. It's kind of a more recently coined term. So most people know what IT is, but not everybody knows what OT is. If you want to give a very brief description.
Yes, of course. OT stands for Operation Technology, and everyone dealing with PLCs, HMIs, and BFDs is an OT engineer already. So you have to be certified for anything like that. Operation technologies and information technologies are dealing with something that is a convergency. This convergence means how IT tools, IT techniques can be done, used, utilized in OT networks. An OT network back in the day was a simple RS-485 daisy chain Modbus RTU communication, or a small network like that, 100 devices. Today, it's everything related with Ethernet. And one key element about these two type of network is that for IT, there is some principle, confidentiality, integrity, availability, that change in OT. In OT, it's very important to have the device active all the time. We cannot allow shutdowns that represent money or losing lives. But there is another very important things that differentiate these two type of networks. And one of that one has to do with safety. IT networks really don't deal with safety at all. OT deal with safety, and now safety over Ethernet demands resiliency and redundancy. So there are specific terms that OT network uses that IT in some degree never was or is not interested to deal with because the nature of the fees, what they do. But now that we're talking about this convergence where we're bringing tools, techniques, software, and everything else, OT people, you guys, PLC engineers, control engineers, plant managers, you need to be aware of how things can be done. And this type of webinar actually is a great introduction about how you can start implementing right away what to do to protect your networks without sacrificing performance. So what you have in the screen is just basically a simple table that show key differentiators between IT and OT networks.
Right. And this is where companies like ICA come in. This is why we pulled this together. So as a system integrator, our job is to go in and so evaluate a customer system and look at, we're primarily concerned with the OT side. However, we do have to be concerned about the interface between the IT and the OT, and we do have to work with the facility IT people. And very often, there's a disconnect between IT people and OT people. Even though we operate in a similar space and there's definitely overlap, there's gaps in knowledge on either side. So this is where, as a system integrator, part of our job is to facilitate, to bring the expertise in from the OT side and the IT side, where internally whenever we can, and externally whenever we can't, to kind of bring the right players together to try to give the customer a overall integrated solution that will cover all of their concerns. Now, the other thing that we're talking about, there's various ways to try to mitigate these threats. One, to reduce the possibility of the threat, and then two, where those vulnerabilities are existing, to try to close them up and minimize them. But the other side of the coin is to remember that the bad guys are always evolving too. They're always looking for new methods. So as we come up with new ways to stop them, they're going to look for new ways to defeat us. So it's a constant battle. And so it's important to not just evaluate these things at a one-time basis, but to continually reevaluate them on a regular basis, so that you can keep ahead of whatever the new and emerging threats are and the new methods. As William said, there's tools out there now that it used to be a hacker, you had to be fairly well educated and fairly sophisticated, and now you can get a tool out there that anybody who can operate a computer can be a hacker and cause a lot of damage. So it's incumbent on us to be on top of what they're doing, but also to try to educate our clients in what these threats are and what tomorrow's threats may be. And it's important for companies too then to see this as an integral part of doing business, because it's not going away. It's only going to get worse as time goes on. So it's something that has to be planned for and budgeted for, and including, I said, those ongoing evaluations that need to happen. Then these needs to be part of business planning. And that leads to kind of the last thing we want to cover before we get to the Q&A, is really what happens if the worst happens. There's, like I said before, we've seen a number of clients had these issues, and that they weren't prepared for. But even the best of circumstances, sometimes the bad guys get ahead, and if there's gaps that haven't been yet evaluated. So the important part then is to know how to recover, because as I mentioned before, some of those clients that got hijacked, some of them were down for a few, their networks were down for a couple of weeks. One was down for 3 or 4, almost 4 months. And trying to do business in that circumstance was quite difficult. So the big thing is to one, try to figure out what the threats will be, try to mitigate the threats, but then also be prepared if the worst happens, how to come back from it. And that's, again, something that requires evaluation on both the IT side and the OT side to make sure that you have a good recovery.
Yep, and just to kind of jump in on what Joe was saying there, right? As well as what he said before he brought this up, right? If you look at any cybersecurity program, right, and really what we're talking about is taking the cybersecurity programs that have existed for a while in the IT space and expanding them into the industrial control system space, where until the advent of recent technologies, it wasn't really relevant. Well, now obviously it is. Right. And some of the elements of a cybersecurity program that Joe referred to, number one, is continuous improvement, right? You want to monitor the effectiveness of your program, stay up to speed on the threat landscape, and constantly adopt your controls to account for the evolving threat landscape, right? So it's a constant process of assessment, remediation, and strategic monitoring and response, right? Now, on the recovery side, right, the way that we typically introduce that is a tabletop exercise, right? In incident response exercise, we outline an incident response plan, and we pull all the players around the table, right? And we walk through some scenarios, right? And in walking through those scenarios, I ask the pertinent questions. Okay, well, in this type of situation, what tools would you leverage? How would you isolate and contain the incident from expanding throughout your environment? What tools would you take to recovery? Okay, well, you have backups, right? Show me how you would access those backups. Show me how you would review the logs from the various devices, and what if that device was down? Are the logs being sent out elsewhere, right? Digging into all those different elements of these things to identify the areas where you would struggle in the case of an actual incident, and then implement the technologies and processes to get you more prepared, right? So in recovery, right, the first thing to do is to actually plan for it, and to run through tabletop exercises to simulate these potential issues and identify where you're not prepared and get those measures in place. So that's how I would recommend starting on the recovery planning.
Right. And this is and recovery planning is a part of one service that ICA offers when we do we call it our system lifecycle evaluation. And part of that, it was originally thought of as really just from a maintenance and reliability standpoint, but now with these cyber threats being so looming large, that it's actually become part of that mitigation as well. And part of it is really kind of looking at your systems and looking at your OT technology, what equipment you have, and what vulnerabilities they have, and what do you have spare parts? Can you get spare parts? Are they still available? Do you have backups of your system? Do you keep your backups current? Do you have documentation on how your system works? Because again, if those and do you have offsite backup? And do you have other ways to mitigate? So this way, if your site was hit by a denial of service or a physical attack, something happens, that how long would it take? So we try to identify what those vulnerabilities are and what would be the expected mean time to recovery. And so once we do that, then now you have a roadmap for where to do the continuous improvement. As Dom mentioned, now you don't just want to look and see where your flaws are. You want to try constantly get them better. Give one example. This is actually something we're doing for a client now. We have a site that was intruder attempted to get in, and we have evidence that somebody tried to get in but was blocked. We actually have an E1 at that site, and the E1 blocked their attempts. But now that we know that someone's trying, now that we got to we're not just going to leave it to the E1, even though the E1 performed beautifully and stop the intrusion. Now that we know that the hackers know it's there, we're looking at some other methods to make it more difficult for them to find that site again and try to attack it. So try to prevent them from even attacking it in the first place. At least we know we got a good solution to prevent an attack, but let's try to avoid attacks in the first place. So this is all part of that continuous improvement and recovery. William, want to
I
add
think
something?
that, yes, now that we're talking about how we start, where I am as an end user, service provider, vendor, where and how is quite interesting to answer. So obviously, representing a big company, we are attached to standards, and the IC 62443 has a specific aspect for every single one of us. So if you are a system integrator, a component supplier, an asset owner, there are specific things that you start doing today, starting with this idea of that risk assessment and moving forward. So there is a roadmap that we can follow, and it's quite important and relevant just to bring always this, because sometimes, the way that people address cybersecurity is, as I said before, buying widget to protect widgets. That's not cybersecurity.
Trevor, you want to add something? You're muted.
Yeah, fix that. Okay. No, I was going to say that regarding that ISO standard, there's a lot of things that were mentioned early on about vendors bringing their products up to standards. And one of the things that we're seeing is as actors are getting more and more sophisticated, bad actors, that is, especially when you talk about state actors, they're learning about these systems. Let's talk about Modbus. Not the average person knows about Modbus, but as people are learning how to use these OT technologies to get into equipment, you want to do a lot more at the device level. So we're cognizant of that, and we're building those technologies into our own products. But also we're starting to see these types of like encrypted firmwares and authenticated firmware and security chips and things like this built into products that are used to help build that security into your OT infrastructure.
Right, just to kind of jump in here, I was just going to jump in and add to what you said and what William said, and I think it was very pertinent that everything starts with an assessment of your environment, right? When we're talking about instituting a cybersecurity program, it's got to start with an assessment, right? Not just, right? So obviously an assessment would identify all the potential vulnerabilities that threat actors could exploit to cause damage to your environment or compromise it in some way, right? And in identifying those issues, of course, we want to remediate those issues, implement technologies and processes, harden systems to close these vulnerabilities, right? And usually what happens is we go through that process and we handle a lot of the low-hanging fruit in that regard, right? But there's things that remediation processes that need to be done over the long term that are expensive and exhaustive and cause system downtime, right? You can't just simply throw a lot of money at the problem and take an operational outage to fix all these things right away, right? So the next stage is the implementation of monitoring and response processes, like Joe alluded to on the last slide, which is, okay, we know all the issues and vulnerabilities associated with our systems that could be exploited. We've closed the ones that we could, and now we're going to implement monitoring processes to watch the ones that we couldn't close and respond to threats. Right, and Trevor was just mentioning that as was William, right? And we identified that this particular technology was in place, the E1 technology that blocked this particular exploit attempt. What if that technology was not there? Would that exploit attempt have been detected? And if so, what would you do about it? How would you respond, right? And that goes into the incident response exercise and planning as well, and managed security operations and all the elements that go in there, right? It's not just we're compromised and now we got to recover. It's we're about to be compromised. How do we prevent this from happening?
Right.
Right.
So I want to thank everybody. We're coming near the end, so I want to open it up for questions and answers. So for any of the participants, if you have any questions, if you've been holding back, now's the time to type into your client and say what your questions are. We're happy to try to get them answered. It looks like we got another late participant. For the person who just arrived, just want to let you know this session is being recorded. You will receive an email that's got a link to YouTube where this will be uploaded. So you will have the opportunity to watch it from the beginning if you so desire. And again, I'll mention again, if anybody has any questions in the audience, please type some questions into the client and we will be happy to answer you. While we're waiting for questions, we can continue to talk. If you want to, I know you were in the middle of something there, Dom. If you want to complete your thought.
No, I had pretty much completed it, right? I mean, ultimately, it's about the institution of a cybersecurity program, right? And there has to be some formalization around that. And of course, that sounds scary to companies that haven't done this before. It sounds certainly expensive, right? But ultimately, these things the processes can be truncated somewhat, right? When we talk about a cybersecurity assessment as a basis for instituting a program, right? The good news is we've seen all this before, right? We know what to look for. It's not like we're walking in blind and, spending 200 man hours hunting for stuff. We know what to look for, right? So we can generally get there pretty quickly and put kind of a framework in place that's going to improve the security posture. And we have to work that fast anyway, right? The threat actors are already hard at work trying to exploit these environments, as we've all seen.
Right. So, that's the thing. And that's where, again, we're ICA, where we come in and we've partnered, obviously with STI and with HMS and Turtle and other vendors. I know, Charlie Marlin, you're out there. I see you. So, we've come up with, kind of our kind of approach to try to, identifying and mitigating these threats, both on a security level and also on an operational level. And particularly, we've got a lot of clients out there with legacy systems. If your system wasn't put in the last 2 years, it's probably a legacy system. So, because there's, again, even to the point of just, hey, what version of Windows are you running? Are you running an old version of Windows? There can be, we just did a small project for a client where we migrated a server because they were running their platform on an old server that had it was Windows Server 2003 that had some known security vulnerabilities, and they had actually been attacked. So we helped migrate that off to a newer, more secure platform. And this is what we do. So I know we have a couple more minutes left, so I want to thank William, and I want to thank Trevor and Dom for coming in and participating in this, and for all the support we've had in the past. If anyone has any questions or any follow-up questions, there you see our contact information is there on the screen. You will be getting a link to this presentation so you can watch it again later. And if you want to have an evaluation, like I said, ICA, we cover, we overlap. We do most of our stuff's OT, but we do overlap in the IT, but we also team up with STI to handle the things that are beyond our remit, and vice versa. And we certainly have our expertise on the OT side here with our vendors and manufacturers that we deal with. So I want to thank everybody who showed up, and just so you know, just as a follow-up, the next webinar will actually be on business continuity planning. So that's part of that recovery plan. What do you do to avoid all the things that could shut you down for a prolonged length of time, both from either a security standpoint, a cyber terrorism, or actually physical terrorism, weather events, any energy release, anything that causes your system to be unavailable, and how do you mitigate that? How do you prevent that? And how do you recover from it? How do you keep your business going so you don't get wiped out of business and when something bad happens. And I guess that's it. I don't see any questions. So we're going to say thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.